started like any other Saturday for me. My family had gone to visit my grandparents, but I opted to stay behind, relishing the idea of having the house to myself for the weekend. Little did I know that this decision would lead me into a chilling encounter with my creepy neighbor. Our neighborhood was never known for being the safest, and rumors about a few eccentric residents had circulated for years. I had always dismissed them as typical small-town gossip, never imagining that I would become part of a spine-chilling tale myself. Eager to make the most of my solitary weekend, I invited two of my closest friends over. We decided to spend the evening playing table tennis in the basement, laughing and enjoying our time together. As the night progressed, an unsettling feeling began to linger in the air, but we attributed it to our imaginations running wild in the dark. It was when we heard footsteps in the backyard that our carefree evening took a sharp turn. At first, I brushed it off, thinking it might be a stray animal or a neighbor taking a late-night stroll. However, the sense of unease intensified when we heard a distinct knock on the front door. I cautiously approached the door and peered through the peephole. Standing on the porch was my neighbor, a man we had all heard unsettling stories about. He claimed that my dad had borrowed something from him, and he needed it back immediately. The odd part was that my dad had never mentioned borrowing anything, and the situation felt suspicious. My instincts kicked in, and a chill ran down my spine as I noticed the presence of other shadowy figures lurking behind him. It became clear that this was not a routine visit, and a wave of fear washed over me. I signaled to one of my friends to discreetly call the police while I tried to handle the situation. Armed with a kitchen knife, I told the neighbor that I was busy and that he should come back later. His demeanor quickly shifted from seemingly polite to aggressive. He began pounding on the doors, demanding entry and insisting that I give him what he claimed my dad owed him. The tension in the air was palpable, and panic set in as I realized the seriousness of the situation. The knocking became more forceful, and it felt like the doors might give way at any moment. It was at this critical juncture that the distant wail of sirens signaled the arrival of the police. The neighbor's face contorted with rage as the police apprehended him. The shadows that had accompanied him scattered into the night. The police later informed me that they had been monitoring the activities of these individuals due to suspicions of criminal behavior in the neighborhood. Relief washed over me, but the ordeal left a lasting impact. It was a wake-up call about the darker side of the seemingly ordinary neighborhood I had grown up in. The following weeks were tense, and my family decided that it was time for a fresh start. My dad's new job opportunity came at the perfect moment, providing us with the chance to leave the unsettling memories behind and start anew in a different town. That fateful Saturday night served as a stark reminder that danger could be lurking in the most unexpected places, even in the familiar surroundings of one's own home. The experience left an indelible mark on my psyche, and I couldn't shake off the feeling of vulnerability that lingered long after we had moved away from that eerie neighborhood. Moving into my first house at 24 was an exciting step into adulthood. The neighborhood seemed like the perfect place to start this new chapter of my life. Most of my neighbors were friendly, and I quickly formed connections with them. However, there was one neighbor who stood out as an unsettling presence from the start. He was an elderly man who lived alone in a house adjacent to mine. Despite my attempts to be friendly, it was clear that he harbored some animosity toward me. His cold glances and dismissive responses made me uneasy, but I brushed it off, thinking he might just be a solitary person who preferred to keep to himself. As the weeks passed, the tension between us grew. One night, as I looked out my window, I noticed him wandering around the perimeter of my house. A chill ran down my spine as I went outside to confront him. I asked him why he was lurking around my property, and he simply replied that he was taking a walk. It was a feeble excuse, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was up to something. Frustrated by his evasive answers, I expressed my concern and told him I knew he was watching my house. His reaction was a mixture of annoyance and defiance, and I could sense that things were about to take a darker turn. A few days later, as I returned home from work, I spotted him again near my house. This time, I decided to take a firmer stance. I warned him to stay away, threatening to involve the police if he continued his intrusive behavior. The old man's gaze turned venomous, but he reluctantly walked away. My sense of unease didn't dissipate, and I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, always looking over my shoulder. That Friday night, as I settled in to watch TV, the tranquility of the evening was shattered by the blaring sound of my car alarm. Panic set in as I rushed to the window, only to find my car vandalized, with shattered glass and deep scratches marring its surface. I knew in my gut that the mysterious neighbor was responsible for the damage. Fear and anger surged through me as I dialed the police, providing them with a detailed account of the ongoing harassment. To my dismay, they informed me that the man had a history of similar incidents, but due to legal complexities, he had managed to avoid serious consequences in the past. This time, however, the police took decisive action. They arrived promptly, apprehended the neighbor, and charged him with vandalism and harassment. Despite this, to my dismay, he continued to live in his house, a constant reminder of the unsettling events that had unfolded. Haunted by the fear of retaliation, I decided that moving was the only option. The sense of security that a home should provide had been shattered, and the eerie feeling that he might strike again lingered. As I planned my relocation, I couldn't shake the paranoia that this neighbor, fueled by some unknown vendetta, might attempt something even more sinister. The move became a desperate bid for peace of mind, a chance to leave behind the haunting memories and the unnerving presence of a neighbor who had turned my dream home into a living nightmare. Growing up in a tough neighborhood wasn't easy, and the events of one fateful Friday night would forever etch themselves into the fabric of my childhood memories. I was just a 9-year-old, living with my mom and my 12-year-old brother. The weekend was upon us, and as the clock ticked towards 11 p.m., we found ourselves engrossed in the glow of the television. The tranquility of our small haven was abruptly shattered by the sound of footsteps echoing through the dimly lit streets. Alarmed, my mom hurried into the living room, her eyes widening as she grasped the shotgun kept hidden for emergencies. The air in our home became thick with tension, and my brother and I clung to each other, wide-eyed and fearful. Whispers of unsettling rumors about certain individuals in our neighborhood had always floated through the air, but that night, those whispers materialized into the eerie footsteps approaching our front door. My mom wasted no time, urging me to call the police while she barricaded us upstairs, the shotgun clutched tightly in her hands. As the minutes crawled by, the footsteps outside became louder, indicating more than one person. The ominous presence lingered, and we held our breath, straining to hear any clues about their intentions. Then came a voice, muffled through the door, claiming to be a friend of our father. A cold shiver ran down my spine. We knew our father had no such friend. My mom's face tightened with determination as she ordered us to remain silent. The imposter outside grew agitated, his shouts escalating into threats and demands. He began pounding on the door with a ferocity that sent shockwaves through our fragile sanctuary. It was clear this was a trap, a sinister plot to exploit our vulnerability. The tension peaked as the imposter's menacing actions intensified. But just as despair threatened to consume us, the welcome wail of sirens cut through the night. The police had arrived, and a sense of relief washed over us like a soothing balm. The intruder's shouts turned into desperate pleas as the police closed in, and he was swiftly apprehended. As the officers searched the man's belongings, a chilling revelation unfolded. Hidden within his clothes and backpack were a collection of knives and a loaded pistol. The realization that our lives had been hanging by a thread added an extra layer of horror to the night's events. In the aftermath, we learned that the man had a criminal record, and our house had been targeted randomly. The trauma of that night lingered, casting a long shadow over our sense of security. The decision to move became inevitable, and after a year of saving and searching, we finally found solace in a new house, a sanctuary far removed from the haunting memories of that ominous night in our old neighborhood.